She saw my ex leave my house. Then she said, good.
I'm glad
now
she
we
is
can start.
finally
I'm glad
leaving.
she's finally leaving. At
Now we can
7:18
talk about
p.m., my
us.
ex walked out of my house, carrying the last box of her belongings. I thought the hardest part would be watching her drive. Away I was wrong because my neighbor, Naomi, was standing across the street. She watched my ex leave, then she looked at me and said 4 words that I still haven't forgotten. Good, now we can start. I froze. What did you just say? Naomi smiled nothing and walked inside. But she wasn't smiling because my relationship had ended. She was smiling because she knew something I didn't before we uncover what. Naomi had been waiting 3 years to tell me like this story. Share it with someone who loves emotional stories. And subscribe to StoryMun for more heart-touching stories. And tell me where you're watching from. Now let's get started. My name is Evan. I'd lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver for almost 4 years. Naomi lived 3 houses away. We weren't close, at least that's what I thought she was. The woman who collected my packages when I worked late. The neighbor who shoveled snow from my driveway. After a heavy storm, the person who once left a birthday cake outside my door for my daughter, Sophie, when I had completely forgotten to order one. She never asked for anything. She just helped, but I never really noticed. Because I was busy trying to save my relationship. My ex Rachel and I had been together for 5 years. We had planned a future, a wedding, a bigger house. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but inside our home, something had been dying. Quietly, we argued about everything: money, time, my daughter, her career, and eventually we stopped talking altogether. Still, I kept believing that if I tried harder, we'd find our way back. That night, Rachel put the last box in her car. She looked at me and said, "You're a good man, Evan. You're just not the man I want anymore." Then she drove away. I stood there for several minutes. Not crying, not angry, just empty. Then Naomi appeared. "Good," she said. I stared at her. "Good." She walked closer. "Not because you're hurting, then why?" She looked toward the road where Rachel had disappeared. "Because now you're finally free to stop pretending you're happy." Those words hit me harder than I expected. "How long have you known Naomi?" "Looked down long enough." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because you loved her." I laughed bitterly. Maybe I didn't know what love was anymore. Naomi looked at me. "Maybe you knew. Maybe you were just afraid to admit it wasn't enough." Then she walked away that night. I couldn't sleep the next morning. I found an envelope underneath my windshield wiper. There was no name on it. Inside was a photograph. It showed me sitting on a hospital bench. My daughter was asleep against my shoulder. I recognized the day immediately. Sophie had been sick. I'd spent 12 hours at the hospital, but I didn't remember anyone taking a picture. On the back, someone had written, "You looked exhausted. You still smiled at her." I knew the handwriting. Naomi. I went straight to her house. "Why did you take this?" She looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean for you to find it." "Why keep it?" She took a deep breath. "Because that was the night I realized what kind of man you were." "I didn't understand," she continued. "I had just lost my father. I was sitting across the hospital waiting room, completely alone." She looked at the photograph. "And there you were, exhausted, scared, but every time your daughter opened her eyes, you smiled." Her voice cracked. I remember thinking, I wish someone loved me enough to look at me like that. I couldn't speak. Naomi wiped her eyes. "But you were in a relationship, so I never crossed the line. Then why now?" She smiled sadly because yesterday when Rachel left, you didn't look heartbroken. She paused. "You looked relieved." I looked away. She was right. For 5 years, I'd been terrified of losing Rachel. But when she finally left, I realized I'd been terrified of being alone, not of losing her. Naomi stepped closer. "I don't want you to choose me because you're lonely. I don't want to be the woman you run to because someone else walked away. I know then. What do you want?" I looked into her eyes. "I want to know why." The woman who lived 3 houses away somehow knew me better than the person living beside me. Naomi smiled, maybe because I was paying attention. 3 months later, Naomi and I sat on the same porch, where she'd once told me, "Now we can start." Nothing about us was perfect. We disagreed. We had awkward moments. We were still learning each other's fears. But there was one difference. We talked, we listened. And when life became difficult, neither of us reached for the door. One evening, Sophie came outside and sat between us. She looked at Naomi. Are you staying? Naomi smiled. If your dad lets me. Sophie looked at me. I laughed. I think we can arrange that. Sophie smiled, and suddenly I understood something. Sometimes the end of a relationship feels like failure, but not every ending is a punishment. Some endings are protection, some doors closed. Because you've been standing in the wrong room too long, and sometimes the person you were never looking for has been quietly showing you what love looks like all along. If you're watching this after losing someone you thought you'd have forever, remember, their leaving doesn't mean you're unlovable sometimes. It simply means your story isn't finished yet. This is StoryMun, and I want to leave you with one question. Have you ever lost someone and later realized that losing them was actually the beginning of finding yourself? Tell me your story in the comments, because sometimes a stranger's words can comfort us, but sometimes your own story can comfort someone else.